Good morning, Noonan. This is Jimmy Ellison. You're listening to Faith Works, where each week we talk to leaders in our community and in the state who are demonstrating that faith does indeed work. And this morning, I'm thrilled to have my new friend, Brian Goldstone, on the show. Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's great to be with you.
And how was the drive down from Atlanta?
It was a little harrowing, but I am grateful to have arrived here safely in one piece, and it could have been a lot worse.
Yes, well, we're thrilled to have you here. Brian, I met Brian's father at a conference, and this gentleman comes to me, and he finds out that I work with the homeless here in Noonan, and he said, you need to meet my son. He's writing a book about the homeless in America, but it's a new look at homelessness, and the book is called The New American Homeless, and I'm looking forward to hearing about that. But before we get into the book, Brian, I want to hear about you. Tell me a little, how did you grow up? Where did you grow up? And tell me a little of your faith journey.
Sure. So I was born in Queens, New York, and when I was about 5 years old, we moved out to Los Angeles. My mom and dad and my older sister.
Well, your dad's work took you out there?
Yes. Yeah, my dad owns, until he just retired, but he started his own lighting company.
Okay.
And he and his partner sort of based the company out in Los Angeles. So we moved out there, and I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, right outside of LA. And when I was in high school, my parents, in part to give me a new start, because I had kind of fallen in with a really rough crowd and got involved in drugs, all sorts of things.
That was in LA?
That was in LA. They were worried about my future, and we had the resources as a family to kind of uproot, and my dad also had the opportunity, owning his own company, to kind of set up a new branch elsewhere. So my family was looking sort of throughout the Southeast. They were looking at Charlotte, Nashville, and we had some family friends in Atlanta, in Roswell, and we ended up moving there. So
what year was that?
That was in, let's see, that would have been about 95.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So 15 years ago.
Yeah, and so
25 years ago.
25. Wow, that is a strange thing to say out loud. But yeah, we moved there in 95, and then I enrolled at Mount Paran Christian School in Marietta, and graduated from Mount Paran in 99. And after that, I kind of said, I'm never stepping foot in a classroom again. I barely graduated from high school.
And I know the rest of the story. This is funny. So you said no more school.
I said no more school. All my friends were taking the SATs, getting ready to go to college, and I didn't take the SATs. I ended up going to Hawaii to do an organization called Youth with a Mission.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have one of their main bases in Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii, and so I moved to Hawaii and enrolled in that program. I was interested in sort of international missions. And so I was in Hawaii for I think it was about 5 months, and then spent 3 or 4 months in Nepal and Tibet. And that was just a kind of transformative experience for me. And it was while I was in Nepal that I said, I had this curiosity about the culture, and I didn't even know that there was an academic discipline that studied that sort of thing, but I was like, I just want to go to college and learn about all the stuff I'm seeing, and that's what kind of led me to, through the back door, to kind of enroll in college.
Where did you go?
I went to a school called Vanguard University in Orange County, California, in Costa Mesa. My sister had gone there, and I figured if my sister could get in, then anyone could get in.
God, throw your sister under the bus.
I knew that their admissions criteria were not the most rigorous,
sure.
And it was good for me because I had terrible grades and I hadn't taken the SATs, and it ended up just being a wonderful place for me. And I ended up double majoring in cultural anthropology and literature. And and the rest was kind of history after that.
Did you go, I know you have a PhD from Duke.
I do.
And did you go straight undergrad right into your PhD program, or did you work some out?
Yeah, I did. As I was coming to the end of my undergraduate education, I really wanted to keep going with anthropology, and I had. This is a really interesting story. Growing up in Atlanta, we had some family friends who ran a homeless outreach in Atlanta called Safe House. I don't know if you're familiar with Safe House.
Philip Bray.
Yes.
All those guys.
So a guy named King.
I was on the board.
Were you really? Okay. Small world. So,
yeah.
So one of the pastors at Safe House was a guy named King's Pride Hammond. He was from Ghana in West Africa, and he was married to an African American woman from Alabama. And he became kind of a mentor to me when I was in high school, still struggling. And I was spending a lot of time down at Safe House with him. And he felt like God was calling him to go back to Ghana, to his native country, to be a missionary to his own people.
Sure.
And he gave me an invitation to visit anytime. And so, fast forwarding a couple of years to when I'm now studying anthropology in college, I decided I wanted to do a senior thesis, and I needed a place to do that research. So I took him up on his offer to visit him in Ghana, in rural northern Ghana, and that was the beginning of what would become about a 15-year engagement with Ghana. And it was as a result of those early visits that I ended up doing a couple of years of sort of sustained field work in the country, and that's sort of what led me to get a PhD in anthropology.
That is fantastic. And was there a specialty with Ghana with your PhD program?
Yeah, so the focus of my dissertation and my work as an anthropologist was So the area of Ghana where King's Pride and his family had moved to was northern Ghana, which is predominantly Muslim. He was from the predominantly Christian South, but he felt like God was calling him to minister to the Muslims of the North. And so what I ended up looking at in my dissertation was really a movement of which King was a part of, Pentecostal and charismatic churches from the South. They were all Ghanaian. These weren't Americans or Europeans going into this area. They were Ghanaians who were going into the North, and so I ended up kind of looking at that encounter of this particular variety of Christianity and Islam, and this was, of course, sort of in the wake of 9/11 and a lot of the worries about Islam not nationwide and also globally. And in neighboring Nigeria, there was a lot of conflict between Christians and Muslims. And so I was kind of looking at this area as a microcosm of this larger global dynamic. Sure. And wondering, is there a peaceful way that this can happen? And strangely enough, I just became so fascinated by this sort of charismatic movement in Ghana and West Africa more generally. At the very heart of that was sort of a preoccupation with the miraculous, with signs and wonders, with the gifts of the Spirit. And I just became really curious about sort of the role of miracles in this form of faith, and started going deep into the history of Christianity and also Islam, the role of the supernatural it took me down a lot of sort of rabbit holes. Yeah.
You got a story, you got a supernatural story that just.
Oh, I mean, there were. I don't know that there's one in particular. It was a very. It was kind of a mind-blowing, several years for me doing this work, because I had my own faith that I was coming in with, and I think, there was a lot about the kind of focus on miracles and also prosperity. The prosperity gospel was really, really big in this place, and there was a lot about it, frankly, that I was uncomfortable with as a Christian. You know, as an anthropologist, as a scholar, I had to kind of try to just see it for what it was and understand it. But as a Christian, a lot of it didn't sit with, you know, the Jesus that I knew and believed in. And there were just many episodes and moments where I was challenged to get outside my comfort zone, and but also where there were times where I was asked to preach in the churches I was studying and visiting, and I would I would try to present the gospel as I understood it. And so in some ways that was those moments were more dramatic for me than even some of the more miraculous things I witnessed. And, you know, and a lot of that, like people being raised from the dead, there was a lot of stuff even within those churches of doubting whether or not that was really the case, sort of manipulation. I would love to be able to say, you know, that the church as I witnessed it in this area was just this pure, you know, unsullied, you know, thing. But the church is the church.
Sounds like the church. Sounds like the United States.
Absolutely.
There's church is made up of flawed.
The church is the church. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now you're married. You get married sometime along this journey.
Yes.
Married now.
Yep. Got married in 2007. So I've been married for 13 years now.
And so, were you in Ghana then?
I was finishing my PhD at Duke. My wife, Elaine, she was finishing her master's in nursing at Duke. She's a nurse practitioner.
Nice.
And when we got married, we spent our first year of being married in Ghana. So I am still paying her back for that year of just dropping everything and being willing to move.
It's a good woman, brother.
She's a very good woman. And I don't know that her parents have fully, you know, come to terms with that.
Well, at least you're in the States now with the grandchildren.
Yes.
That helps,
yes.
right?
And I got typhoid fever and had to be airlifted. I've had malaria several times. I joke that I have kind of a punch card of infectious diseases. And so Elaine, as a nurse, you know, I'm sure protected me from worse things than that. It's been an adventure together.
Wow. So tell us, how did you get this book deal? And the book title is The New American Homeless. And I know you're researching now. Matter of fact, we've got a lunch today with a person I know well in our community who is the person that you're writing about with the New American Homeless. So tell us, how did you get this book deal? Why this book? How did you get to this point?
So there's a kind of gap between what I was just describing of being an academic, being an anthropologist, doing this research, and then, you know, what has sort of become a new career as a journalist. I guess it's about 4 years ago now. When I got my PhD at Duke, I was very fortunate to get a 3-year fellowship, what's called a postdoctoral fellowship, at Columbia University in New York, and, you know, very prestigious fellowship that is supposed to sort of be the key to not just a career as an academic, but kind of in the top tier, you know, Ivy League kind of places. And while I was in New York, while I was doing this postdoctoral fellowship.
Are you doing research?
I was turning my dissertation into a book.
Got it.
And I ended up writing that book and not publishing it because that's kind of a whole nother story. But there was a lot of internal conflict about being an academic, presenting this research to the wider public. There was a lot of pressures to kind of make the book conform to certain academic standards, and kind of the stories I wanted to tell, I was being told by my colleagues in academia, you know, that this wasn't scholarly enough. And I really wanted to tell stories. I wanted to get to know people. I wanted to tell stories.
And that's not considered scholarly.
Yeah, they wanted, you know, more theory and more, and there was just a lot about that never really sat well with me.
Sure.
And so toward the end of that time in New York, I have sort of been harboring this kind of secret, you know, passion for for more public writing, for journalism, and I got some job offers toward the end of that time in New York, but none of them really seemed worth pursuing, especially, you know, my wife has a career as a nurse practitioner, we have children, and just the idea of uprooting and going, you know, to some random place in the country, pursuing a career that I already have some ambivalence about. So long story short, we decided, let's move where we have family. So my parents are here in Atlanta, and I'm just gonna dive into this new career path as a writer and journalist. Felt very scary, and, you know, financially, going from the kind of precariousness of an academic to the precariousness of a journalist, it was like from the frying pan into the fire. And people thought I was crazy.
You've been writing about yourself as a homeless
person. I was very close to, yeah. I mean, the truth is, I was fortunate to have the support of family financially.
And I think, and we can talk, we're going to talk a lot about what we've learned, what you've learned, and how that connects with what we do here in Noonan. But that's going to be one of the key elements, is having that family support.
Totally.
That is the deciding factor of those that we serve that are homeless, is that they have the relationships that are still intact with their family, and the family has means to help them. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and you know, I joke about how scary it was to dive into this new career, and how financially risky that was. But I don't want to have any illusions about the fact that there was a safety net there for my family and I. And I think, as you said, that really is one of the defining differences. You know, a term that I discovered, and we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but a term I discovered in doing research about homelessness and housing instability is this term called network poverty. And what that term suggests is that, you know, it's a poverty of not having a network, not that the people in your life, your social world, that everyone is kind of in a similar predicament that you are. They don't have that emergency fund, they don't have that safety net, and so there's really no one to turn to for help when the floor falls out from underneath you. And so of course that really is a huge difference between someone in my position and those who I'm working with and writing about. But yeah, so I just to finish that story about how I came to where I am now, I started working. My dream was to kind of write for magazines, to do long, in-depth articles that would have a lot of the nuance and complexity of you know, kind of my academic work, where it wouldn't be like as superficial and kind of parachute in and out as a lot of like journalists are forced to do, writing for newspapers and such. And I got the opportunity to write for a magazine called Harper's Magazine, and I wrote several articles for them. I wrote about the opioid epidemic. That article was about people suffering from chronic pain who have been cut off from their medication, and sort of what I call the collateral damage of the opioid crisis, where they're really suffering as a result of this crackdown on prescription pills. And so I wrote about that, and I wrote about the crisis of mental health care in West Africa and the lack of sort of support for those suffering from psychiatric disorders. And then I went to Israel. I wrote about African refugees in Israel who have kind of been forced out of the country because for various reasons. That's a whole nother topic, but you know, it was such a gift to be able to kind of follow my curiosities and my interests where they led me, and to have this period of engagement with these different topics and really different worlds, because they're really all over the place. And that, you know, something I've been wanting to write about for a long time is just trying to understand, really going back to those days working at Safe House, you know, that early exposure to homelessness here in Atlanta. I think that planted the seed in me. Just how is it that in the richest country in the world, there are people sleeping on the street, and not just one or two, but in such great numbers. And so I wanted to write an article trying to wrap my head around that, and that's what led me. I wrote a magazine piece for the New Republic magazine called The New American Homeless, and that was looking at what I'm calling the changing face of homelessness, where it's not so much about what I think sometimes we associate with homelessness, like mental illness, severe mental illness, disabilities, addiction. That can certainly be in the mix for the folks I'm writing about, but I'm really focused on what is sometimes called the hidden homeless, people who are doing what they're supposed to. They're working full-time jobs, sometimes
they're couch surfing over here.
Yeah, and they've just been kind of priced out of housing. They can't afford
that's
to
a real. That's a.
Anymore.
Hey Ryan, amen. That's a real issue, isn't it? I mean, it's a real issue.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So how did the book deal come about? Somebody, or is this you're going to publish independently, or did?
No. So when this magazine piece came out over the summer called The New American Homeless, it was focused here on a family in Atlanta.
Yeah, I read the article, and we'll post the article so you can read it.
Yeah. That piece came out, and I remember even the day before that came out, this is a little embarrassing to admit, but I was, calling my mom saying, please, can you post this on Facebook when it comes out? I was so afraid that, I had spent almost a year working on this article and following this family's journey and trying to shed light on these larger issues. And I was afraid, as often happens with these articles, that it would drop and no one would read it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I was really, really unsure whether it would have any impact at all. But to my utter astonishment, when it came out, it kind of immediately began to go viral, and different celebrities were sharing it, and getting in touch with Susan Sarandon and just different people who I admired, religious leaders all over it just kind of blew up, and a woman named Soledad O'Brien, who some of your listeners may be familiar with. She used to be on CNN.
Yeah, I'm about to say, she's
and she now has her own talk show, but she has over 1 million followers on Twitter, and she shared the article, and then she reached out to me and asked if she could start a GoFundMe campaign for this family I wrote about, and within a week, $30,000 was raised for the family I wrote, and it just kind of blew up, and then publishers started reaching out to me asking if I would be interested in writing a book about this, and it, fortuitously, it was the first article I've written where I felt like I just want to keep going with it. I felt like I had only scratched the surface of this really monumental issue, and an issue that I think defines a lot of where we're at right now as a country. And I wanted to just keep going with it. So I have an agent, and we had been talking about the possibility of turning this into a book, and it was just a blessing that this also happened to be the first article I wrote where there was just a lot of interest from publishers. And so my agent, I wrote a book proposal, and my agent ended up sending it out to various publishers in New York, and again, to our surprise, to put it mildly, I think 14 out of the 15 publishers he sent it to wanted to buy the book.
Are you kidding me, Brian? That is outstanding. That just doesn't. I mean, I'm. Tell him I'm an author too, Brian.
Yeah.
Brian. Tell him I'm an author. Yeah, I don't know if my books, but my, I don't pretend to write at that level. But I have talked to publishers. I know how difficult that is, and to have that type of response. Wow. I'm assuming the momentum of the article, that had to contribute
Absolutely.
to that. But of course, the content which you gave them with the book proposal is what sold it, because people said they're not going to invest in you if they don't believe they can make money. That's the bottom line. And so it is about business. It's about the bottom line for them, for the publisher. Can we make money on this? And so they saw this need, this topic, and how you articulated the problem and the solution. as something to say, hey, we want this. That's exciting, man.
Thank you.
Congratulations. That's big.
It's a humongous blessing, and I think it's made me go back to a lot of my work on miracles, because it really does feel like a miracle.
It feels like one, doesn't it?
I mean, a miracle that a publisher would see this, see a market for a book like this, and at the kind of scale that they're imagining.
Yeah,
so.
That's great. Well, Brian, we're coming up on a hard stop, and when we come back on the back half of the show, I want us to talk about why do you think this is so attractive? Why is this such a big topic? What are you learning with your research, and what are some solutions? I also want us to talk about when we get back. Friends, you're listening to FaithWorks. We'll be right back.
You've been around long enough to know good stuff when you hear it. That's why you're here now. Classic Hits, WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key.
Join us here, live from Newnan, Georgia, as we present the Health, Happiness, and Harmony Hour, every Wednesday from 10 to 11. I'm your host, Dr. Lewis Boynton. Please join us each week as we have new guests and talk about topics related to the psychological world. We're hoping that you will find interesting and helpful topics that will help you have more health, happiness, and harmony in your life. Join us every Wednesday from 10 to 11 at 99.1 WQEE Rock and Roll Radio.
Tune in the second and fourth Thursday each month for Know Your Rights. I'm your host, Charles Cobble, and we will discuss your rights and have plenty of information on what those rights are every second and fourth Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on WQEE 99.1 FM.
Ever dreamed of being a radio DJ or hosting your own show? Now here's your chance. WQEE 99 Rock the Key is giving you an opportunity to host your own show. If you'd like to get your advertising message across the thousands of listeners throughout the area, here's your chance. Hosting your own show is the way to do it. Perfect for attorneys, realtors, churches, sports talk shows, and more. Contact 678-673-6318 for further information. Host your own show.
The biggest schools.
Touchdown, Penn State, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State will win it.
The biggest games.
Kick is good. The Longhorns lead. Intercepted at the goal line. The Dogs have picked it up.
Reliving the weekend on the gridiron. It's the College Football Rewind.
Throws over the middle. Pass broken up. And the Huskies are going to win. The Gators get a pick six.
Download on Sunday mornings on Apple Podcasts.
This place, it's an insane asylum.
Search College Sports now.
All things River Dragons hockey this Tuesday on WQEE and WZEV. It's Swamp Fox Coaches Show at 6 p.m.
Hey, I'm Jimmy Ellis, and I'm the pastor here at Newnan City Church. I want to thank you. You'll find as you walk through that we focus on three areas primarily. One is worship, small groups, and local missions. And our purpose is transforming lives for Jesus' sake, helping individuals experience that transformation. And we use these three areas, worship, small groups, and local missions, to help individuals experience that. So you'll get a sense of who Newnan City Church is, and I hope that you'll come and worship with us soon. Take care, and God bless.
Around long enough to remember getting up to turn the channels on the TV? That's classic. Classic Hits, WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key.
Welcome back to FaithWorks. This is Jimmy Ellison, and we're talking to my new friend Brian Goldstone, who is a freelance writer who has a book deal, The New American Homeless. And Brian, I'm loving this conversation. I'm loving hearing about your work, your passion, and to make an impact. Why do you think writing a book about homelessness, why is that something people are interested in now? And as you shared earlier, how this family that you wrote about, I mean, people from all who knows, probably all over the world, did the GoFundMe, $30,000 overnight. Why is that? Why is there such a passion right now to make a difference?
I mean, I think part of it has to do with the fact that in some parts of this country, on the West Coast especially, homelessness has become an absolutely inescapable phenomenon. In those areas where I used to hang out in LA and in California, I mean, encampments spread as far as the eye can see.
And I think those of us who are in Georgia, we can't visualize that.
Absolutely.
We can't imagine the impact of that.
Yeah. I mean, homelessness for a long time in many cities, including LA, we're kind of confined to particular areas, the Skid Row areas, and that in itself has always been an abomination. The fact that you had hundreds and hundreds of people kind of crowded into this little few block radius, and we're just kind of confined there. But what's happened over the last few years is it's just kind of spread out. It's just exploded all over the state, and it's happening in Seattle. It's happening. New York has the largest homeless population in the country. It's just so. Part of the answer to that question is.
And when you say homeless, you are. I'm making some assumptions. Chronically homeless. You're talking about people who are outside in tents or under bridges.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge question, because part of what I'm doing in this book and in my work is trying to redefine homelessness and kind of expand the definition and sort of change the paradigm around homelessness. But in those cities, I am talking more about just the chronically on the street, in your face kind of homelessness that, I think for a lot of people, I guess a cynical answer would be it's getting in their way every day. They're finding human waste and syringes and just the sort of the.
And those are real issues. Those are real problems.
Those are absolutely real problems. And people want to understand, why is this happening? And there's a lot of, this has become a national political issue. President Trump has tweeted a lot about the homeless situations in California, and kind of, politicizing that and saying, well, this is a Democrat government, and
politicians are not doing their job. That's his.
And there's a kind of like political football being passed around, and so it very much has become a kind of public conversation in a way that maybe it wasn't a few years ago. But I think for people like here in Georgia and people throughout the country, every city really in the country has a homeless population, and I think for many people,
you think people believe that
there are homeless. I think we probably speak out of both sides of our mouth. I think on the one hand, there's a part of our sort of subconscious that just believes that homelessness, that whether you call them hobos or vagrants, or that you could go to pretty much any small town in America and find at least a few people who are struggling with housing and kind of they're panhandling. And I think we've just we've come to assume that that's just kind of an unavoidable feature of modern city life, is that you're going to have.
They quote Jesus.
The poor will always be with you.
And then they use that verse as an excuse not to do anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think we are speaking, because on the one hand, like we feel this to be something that is just kind of with us.
Sure.
And on the other hand, I think we are in denial about the plight that a lot of our neighbors are in, and
I think that's where what I've experienced. I land there, Brian, that there are, we're just not even going to deal with it. We're just going to pretend it doesn't exist, and so that's kind of where I feel. We know it exists in Atlanta. We know it exists in big, but Noonan, really, Noonan.
Yeah.
We were open last week. We had that cold spell that came through Georgia. We had 16 homeless persons spend the night at our church when it dropped below freezing. 16.
Yeah.
all had Noonan. They're
Yeah,
from here. No,
yeah.
They're not folks up and down the interstate. These are Noonan people. 16.
Yeah, and that's I think from one perspective, like that should be utterly shocking. That should be a wake-up call. That should cause us to be losing sleep at night.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the normalization of poverty and homelessness specifically is that we just kind of assume that this is the way it is, and part of what I've realized is that we, I'll speak as a Christian, we as the church, we as Christians, we've come up with explanations that allow us to sleep at night. We come up with, well, it must be a problem of personal responsibility. They must have mismanaged their finances. They must have squandered the opportunities that they were given. Maybe it's because in certain communities there's a problem of fatherlessness and the broken family, and those are real problems. All of those things are real. Addiction is real. Mental health crises are real. But what has happened is we take those explanations and we take it as a kind of opportunity to opt out of the entire conversation, and we spend very little time actually listening to the voices of those who are experiencing these things, and we put them in a box, and then we allow them to live in that box for the rest of their lives, and we continue along our sort of road, and at best we may write a check and support a local outreach or go give out Christmas presents once a year.
Good.
It's all good.
All good, but there's got to be there's got to be more to the solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are you learning? You've been studying homelessness, and you started this article. Mm-hmm. So it's been how many? 2 years ago?
Yeah, about 2 years. Uh-huh.
And what are you learning? And as an anthropologist, what are some of the things you've seen, you discovered, systems that are making this happen?
I think one of the most striking things I've discovered is that the people that we see on the street, the people who are chronically homeless, the people who are living in tents or holding signs at the intersection, that population of the homeless makes up only about 10 to 15% of homeless people across the country, and that same proportion is true for here in Georgia. The other 85-90% of homeless people are pretty much hidden from our view. They are families. They are people who are living in extended stay motels. They're people who are sitting beside us on the bus in the morning, serving us coffee, working in restaurants, low-paying job, driving Uber, Lyft, and at the end of the day, they're sleeping in their car or they're or even on the street. But they are doing everything they can to remain hidden. I've been absolutely shocked by that reality, that the homelessness that we see with our eyes that is conspicuous actually is a tiny, tiny minority of those who are experiencing homelessness in the U.S. And what that's led me to is a conviction that because there's different types of homelessness and different routes into homelessness, there have to be different solutions to those different forms.
Yeah, you treat the working homeless different. That is a different system that gets them on their feet.
Absolutely.
Than the one who is shooting up heroin.
Exactly.
Last night.
Exactly. But most of our solutions go. And I think this is true both for what local outreaches are doing to the level of the federal government. A lot of the solutions are oriented around that small minority of people. So rehab, getting people job training, mental health treatment, those tend to be a lot of the solutions that are put forward. And one of the main prescriptions to ending homelessness in the U.S. is what's called permanent supportive housing, where you have these wraparound services, and that is absolutely needed for those people who have been chronically homeless, who can't kind of get by on their own, who need that support. But for a lot of people, what they need are jobs that pay a living wage, not the minimum wage, because that just isn't enough to put a roof over your head in many parts of the country. They need housing. They need affordable housing.
Yeah.
And Atlanta has revitalized, and as the city has sort of undergone this rebirth, there have been a lot of casualties of that revitalization, and those are the people I'm kind of focusing on in the book. The people who have been priced out and who, may have lived in Atlanta for generations, and now there really isn't anywhere for them to go.
Yeah, that's a real issue. That's in Atlanta. That is we dealt with that, the west side of Atlanta. When we were there with my wife and I started a homeless mission back in 2013, and we partnered with a homeless shelter there on the west side called City of Refuge. And so we got to know a lot of our neighbors there, and the housing prices, the value is going up.
Absolutely.
Taxes are going up. They can't afford the taxes. They're forced to move out. People, those who are coming in and flipping the houses, coming in and buying them out at a low price. Or the owners of the housing. These people that we know, they're primarily renting, and so the owners of the houses can't afford it. They push them out. It's it's just moving them out, and then what do they do at that point? Where do they go? They need to be on a bus line so they can go to work because they don't have vehicles. They can't afford the insurance that it costs to be on the west side of Atlanta because insurance is so high for a vehicle. It's a real issue. Trying to get through it.
And I think one of the biggest sort of contributions that I'm hoping to make with this book is to connect the question of housing to the question of homelessness, because it's a very simple kind of equation, but it's been amazing to me to discover that among those who work in homeless services, either in the trenches, like I said, a lot of the solutions that have been put forward are intended for a very tiny sliver of the homeless population, and to the extent that housing is part of the discussion, it's usually housing that we need to get people out of homelessness. But the question of how to prevent homelessness from happening to begin with is really a question of how to address housing insecurity for those who are sort of teetering on the edge. And so, just bringing these two discussions together, that also goes back to the question of why there's so much interest in this project and in this topic. I think a lot of people who may not be thinking about homelessness per se, they are very much aware of what we were just talking about with, the rising real estate prices, the rising rents, and for low-wage, low-income people, that's sort of the iceberg under the surface. The tip of the iceberg are those we see on the street. The underlying iceberg is this huge number of people who are one paycheck, one missed rent check away from becoming homeless. And that's and I'm trying to sort of shine a light on what I think of as a much bigger crisis than just those we see on the street.
That is so good. What are some of the solutions? So I give you have unlimited resources. What system or systems do you put in place to truly make a difference? Because we know the government has, you've seen the stats, I'm sure, the dollar amount that's invested from the government. It's just amazing how much money is spent on this issue. That clearly is not working like we would hope it would. It helps some, but what would you do? You're waving your magic wand and boom, things change overnight. What does that look like for solutions?
I've been trying to come to the solutions through the experiences of those I'm writing about. So looking at how they fell into homelessness and saying what could have happened along the way to prevent this from happening, and once they fell into it, what are the measures that could have been taken to sort of pull them out before it became a lifestyle, before it became this abyss that they couldn't get out of. And so the solutions are really varied. It goes everything from to prevent homelessness from happening, among those I'm kind of focusing on here, it would include strengthening protections for tenants, for people who are renting, so that they, like, say you're living in downtown Atlanta or around the Beltline area, and you're in a low-income housing apartment complex, and it gets sold to a developer who wants to push all of the tenants out and get wealthier people in there so that they can, have a better return on their investment. Right now, there's nothing preventing them from evicting all of those tenants. And Georgia, those protections are in place in other states, and Georgia doesn't have those. So a number of people I'm writing about were in that situation, and they just got pushed out of their housing. And then as they were looking for a new place to live, it just wasn't there anymore at their price level. So I think that providing incentives to developers, to landlords, to keep people in place, whether that's offsetting their costs. We give all sorts of government subsidies to homeowners, and we don't give those same kinds of subsidies to renters. But since the financial crisis in 2008, there's been a huge influx of renters into the market, and I think there has to be some kind of support there for them to stay in the homes they currently have. If people are paying their rent on time, if they're taking good care of the property, there should be some kind of safety net there where they're not just at the mercy of the market and thrown around like a pinball wherever they can. So I think those kinds of things can help. Housing vouchers, where right now only 1 out of 4 low-income families that qualify for housing assistance actually receive it because of the waiting lists. And just putting some of those billions of dollars of federal funding into housing vouchers, where you could just take a voucher and give it to a landlord, and that'll help pay your rent. That would be a game changer for many people.
If you figured out a way to give a voucher an additional $300.
Absolutely,
$3,600 a year. If you've had a good track record of being a good renter, here's the government. That could there's a big difference between a $900 rent versus a $1,200 rent.
That could be a life or death amount right there. That's
a different. I know.
Absolutely.
Gosh, Ryan, we've talked about this in Noonan. The rent here, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just off the chart.
This area.
For Noonan, Georgia.
Yeah.
Well, man, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the reasons I was excited to come out here to Noonan is because one of the findings, of that I've come to in this research, and that many other experts have kind of been arguing for a while now, is that the housing situation in Atlanta and in cities like Atlanta and LA and Nashville and Charlotte, all over the country, that what's happening in these cities are kind of radiating outward into the suburbs, into the periphery, and so, it's sort of a ripple effect, and eventually, if things continue to trend in that direction, people are going to be moving out here, and that's going to put a pressure on the housing market here. And the question of where are people going to go where they can afford a roof over their head will become increasingly acute and pressing. And so I think if we want to understand the situation, we can't just limit our discussion to the city. We have to expand it to places like Noonan. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, Brian, this is fascinating. I feel like we could keep talking, It's so good, man. And thank you for, making a difference with your the gift that God's given you to think, process, articulate, write. You're making an impact, man, and this is exciting to see. I can't wait to see the book. What's the projection? When do you think you'll have it written?
Well, I'm spending a lot of time just kind of in the weeds with the research. I want it to. I feel like if this book is going to mean anything, it's going to be because the lives of those I'm writing about are able to come out in all of their complexity, and where these aren't just statistics, but these are real human lives, and that requires time to So I'm looking at spending another 5 or 6 months just on the research and reporting, and then
collecting those stories.
And then the manuscript is due to the publisher, and I'm afraid to say this out loud because September 2021. So that's so.
It'll be out eventually.
There you go. Well, listen, Brian, thank you for coming down to Noonan today, and just look forward to just learning more and watching you and following you. This is going to be good.
Thank you.
Friends, thank you for tuning in today to FaithWorks. The next 2 weeks, we've got a guest host, the Apostle Deborah Harris. That's right. She's going to be leading the next 2 weeks. My wife and I are heading to the Holy Land, and so we will be out of pocket, but Deborah will be leading us with FaithWorks for the next 2 weeks. You have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we will see you next time.